Since we've added post data to our request with our getRatings, we have the ability now to validate incoming data on the request. And this is a good time to give you an example of how you would actually validate request data coming in on your form. In this case, we're going to validate that the request contains our required data for our comment store. And that comment store is going to have 4 fields, and we're going to make them required on that particular request. To do that, we're going to go into our developer pane, select the Add Ratings API, and then we're going to create a extract variables policy. Once we've added the extract variables policy, we're going to define a few variables to extract out of the JSON body. To do that, we're going to use JSON path. JSON path is a nice way to be able to extract out specific values out of a JSON request, and using XPath-like query language that imports that information into variables that you can then validate against in a subsequent policy. Once you've created the extract variables policy, you'll notice that the default template of the extract variables policy populates a lot of tags that don't seem like they're going to be applicable to this scenario. That's because the extract variables policy is intended to work with a lot of different pieces of data. In this case, we're only going to be using extract variables to extract data out of a JSON path, a JSON body. So we're going to specifically look at the JSON path section and remove all the tags that are not applicable to our particular extract. So in our case, we only need the JSON payload tag. I'm going to go ahead and remove all the other tags that are not applicable to our scenario. There is a tag in the extract variables policy I do want to make note of. It's called the variable prefix. The variable prefix is intended to organize your variables by allowing you to add a prefix to them. Now, there is a gotcha to prefixing your variables. Prefix variables are not visible in the trace utility. Oftentimes, I remove my variable prefix and used the variables directly. In the variable tag itself, I'm going to give the name of the variable. In this case, we're going to start with comment. And we're going to extract out the comment from the payload. Then we're going to copy that variable block and paste it 3 times. And then modify it to extract out the commenter, the score, and the truck. As defined within our JSON here. Now, if we were validating that that data existed, we would need to check to see if that data existed once we've extracted it. The way that we do that, and the way that we provide user feedback to say that, hey, the data they passed doesn't exist, is a raise fault policy. The raise fault policy is intended to send an exception or a fault back to the user depending on a condition that wraps that particular policy. So I'm going to go ahead and go into new policy and add a raise fault policy. I'm going to change the content type to application JSON. I'm going to escape my JSON. Then I'm going to add error invalid request. I'm going to use the 400 status code versus the 500. And give it a reason phrase and validata. Now typically I like to use the predefined reason codes, and you can find those on Wikipedia or in the internet in general, but in this case I'm just going to use the 400 invalid to show that you can override those values. Now I've added the raise fault policy. At this point, regardless if the values exist or not, it's going to raise the fault. So what we need to do is actually add a condition to check the values of those variables extracted. So we're going to go ahead and select the add ratings block, and we're going to add a condition to the raise fault policy. And in the condition, we're going to just check those variables that we just extracted and see if they equal to null. If they equal to null, if any of them equal to null, then it will raise the fault. Now to test this, we're going to go ahead and pass a request with that information. We're going to first test it with valid information and watch it successfully run. Now we're going to test it with missing data and watch it successfully fail. So at this point, we've added an extracted variables policy, we've added a raise fault policy, and added a condition around the raise fault policy. We're watching the data come in, and based off the request data, it'll throw a fault if it's missing or invalid.